Welcome to WCAT. I'm Kiki Latimer. I'm your host for the Catholic Bookworm. I'm the author of Home for the Homily and Seeing God's Face, amongst other books. Wonderful book you mentioned, Stevie, with Dr. Stephen Schwartz, Philosophy Begins in Wonder, which I'm actually using presently for a homeschooling group of kids. We're just working our way through it, and they're loving it. So we have with us this morning Dr. Ronda Chervin, and we are, as she said, old friends now. Welcome.
Welcome to you. Thank you, Jesus, for Kiki Latimer, and especially for her work with Stephen Schwartz on this groundbreaking book of a woman and a man called Understanding Abortion, in which Dr. Schwartz's terrific arguments against the killing of babies by abortion are greatly enhanced as a teaching tool when Kiki, who was his student for years, put in the way women who are pro-abortion think, to make the book come alive as a tool, which I used and many people have used in teaching.
So we have that book. We have the Philosophy Begins in Wonder book. So he was quite busy. He's in his 90s now, and he's not doing a lot of writing these days. But I still have the privilege of meeting with him and his lovely wife, Sherry, once a week. And I will actually be seeing them later this afternoon, which is nice.
Oh, beautiful. Okay. Yeah. So
I've read Talkaholics. Talking about being Talkaholics is like talking about my silence course at the other end of the spectrum.
Yeah, I already thought of that. Let's have a long talk about not talking too much. Right. Can you hold up the book so they see the cover?
I cannot, because I do not have the book. I have just the PDF version.
Let me hold it up and hopefully they can see it. But it's a little booklet. It's not a big book. It's a little booklet. And on the cover, which you probably can't see, is this wonderful thing of pussycats, catty pussycats talking with each other. And one is simply very interested. The other one looks all gossipy. And the other one is like yelling at the other two. And it's just a wonderful cover. And
it is.
Covers what I wanted to get across.
I love the book. Like you said, it's a small book, but you packed a lot of information into it. And I liked the fact that the book was broken up into basically 4 parts. The first being, in what ways do we talk too much? And then how can we, why do we talk too much? Which I thought was very interesting, the whys. And then how can we start to look at ways in which we can stop talking inappropriately too much? And then a little workshop at the end, like a week-long ways in which we can become more mindful of our speech, which I thought was wonderful.
Okay.
I thought I'd start with kind of a funny story about Talkaholics. When my husband and I go to parties, like social gatherings, we always, we get introduced to someone and they begin to talk about themselves. And we kind of play this game where it's like, how long will this person talk about themselves? And before they ever ask a question about me or about him. And we've had people that will literally talk about themselves for 2 to 4 hours, about themselves, their vocation, their kids, their grandkids, their work, where they've lived, and never so much as ask you, what do you do for a living? And so we've gotten so that we do it kind of as a game, because you might as well enjoy the situation. But it can be amazing to watch somebody have no interest in another person and just give you their life history.
Okay, so the subtitle of the book, the title is Talkaholics, similar to workaholics, alcoholics, sexaholics, talkaholics, which is a sort of joke, because of course talking too much isn't a sin in the same way as being a sexaholic addicted to porn is a sin, or being an alcoholic so addicted that you are driving dangerously, that's sinful. So talking too much is not a sin. So it's different. However, there's a lot in common. And the subtitle is Fate or Work in Progress, because it can seem as if some people are just fated to talk too much, but very rarely does anyone realize they do, except talk too much, except they'll just throw out lightly, oh, I talk too much, see? But not as if it was a major problem, even though I would guess about the half the people who I would like to be friends with who don't like me, it's because I talk too much. See, so it can have big consequences of the loss of friends who you would like to have. Oh, one of my most, that's not in the book actually, but one of my worst stories is a boss in a place I was working. We used to have lunch in the cafeteria, and I was talking about something that I thought was of great interest to him, and he got up to get dessert. And when he came back, I said, oh, I postponed the end of that story because I thought you would be so interested. And he actually said, Rhonda, I didn't want to hear your interminable stories. That's why I got up to get dessert. Now, since he was my boss, so you can see how it can be much worse than you think. So I began the book by talking about why did I start thinking I talk too much? And a spiritual director just asked me, okay, how many times do you use the word I at the beginning of everything you say? Like, so instead of how are you and then listening, I start with, oh, I can't wait to tell you. See? But behind all this, and this is part of the thing on why do we talk too much, the bottom line, it seems to me, is a thing that I dealt with in one of my bigger books, The Way of Love, which is this image I got for it. I want to think of myself as the heroine of the drama of life. And I want you all to be secondary characters who enhance my role, or cameos. Cameos is people who just come on for a second, but enhance the story of the heroine or hero, see? So as long as that's my real unconscious idea of life, in every situation, by grabbing hold of the conversation, by starting the conversation, interrupting everybody else, insisting on getting my wonderful story across of what happened to me yesterday or 50 years ago, see, I dominate the scene. So that's really huge, now.
It changes the ability to interact with other people, certainly,
Well, it's not so huge. I mean, I have tons of friends who have been putting up with this for 80 years, okay? And I have lots of excuses. See, we can have excuses. So one is, okay, after that priest told me, he said, don't see what happens if you sit down at the table in the cafeteria at work. Sit down and suppose you don't talk first, see what happens. Well, very often what would happen is silence. Why? Because people who sit with me, it's usually because they like to be listeners. They don't like to talk. So he said, so many people like me because they like to listen rather than to talk. See, so then there's that. You can use this as an excuse, okay? The other excuse I have, it happened that my mother was a great talker. And she taught me to never have a single thought that I didn't express because she liked to talk to me. And the degree of this was such that if one of us went to the bathroom, the other one stood outside the door continuing the conversation. So this was such an extreme childhood. So I'd use that as an excuse, see? But it's still all excuses because what should really be happening in Christian conversation is that God is the center of reality. Jesus is the hero. And we should be holding hands in a circle, so to speak, around Jesus, trying to interact with each other through the grace of Jesus, who's the center of everything. See that?
I thought one of the things that was interesting in the book was when you said, that one of the forms of sometimes talking too much is venting. Something happens and you've just got to get it out of your system. So you need a friend to talk it out with. But the idea that to go to someone who's morally superior to yourself, because that person will help you bring it around to prayer and to focusing back on, how the Holy Spirit can help in this situation. And that's something I've certainly learned over the years, to be very careful whom I vent with if I need to yak something out, to make sure that I do it with someone who will not make matters worse, basically, who will not stir up the pot any more than it's already stirred up in me. But that's somebody that will say, okay, I understand how you feel, but let's look at it perhaps from the other person's perspective, and let's take this to prayer. So that's something I learned the hard way. I vented with the wrong people. So I thought that was a wonderful point that you brought up.
I think many people, I bring this up in the book, in the little booklet, many people don't know the difference between detraction and calumny. Okay, calumny is the sin of telling a lie about another person to get them in trouble. So it's a terrible sin to report someone who isn't a drug addict as a dangerously driving drug addict out of hate and revenge, to report them to the police. That would be a huge mortal sin, see? So, but detraction is telling something that's true about a person for no good reason, except that we savor the juicy gossip. I'm going to be the one with the juiciest gossip, see? And I used to be so bad that I didn't even realize that was a sin. Okay, it's a sin if it's a serious matter. It's not a sin if I just say, guess what, so-and-so dyed their hair and it came out purple when they wanted it to be pink. That's not a big deal. But it's something that's important, like talking about everything that's all the faults of a person who someone else knows. And one way this was put to me by a mentor was just stop before you tell a story and ask, is this going to help people to love this person more? So it's not going to help someone.
Yeah, we certainly see a lot of that in politics, and we certainly see a lot of it in the church. Rather than sort of trying to find the good things about our priest or the good things about our parish, it's very easy to yak about the bad stuff, and there's always bad stuff. So, but trying to bring those kind of conversations around to what's good about our parish priest, what's good about our parish, what's good in the world. You do mention one thing is just this continuous yakking about, bad stuff in the world, bad things in the church. just constantly throwing the dirty laundry around, how destructive that is.
Oh, yes, yes, because eventually it fills us with discouragement and even despair if we keep doing that instead of talking about the wonderful things around us. And I have one that's very silly, but I bet I'm not alone in this. That I can walk into my daily mass, which I love, and there are all these people there. And instead of thinking, how wonderful that they're there, I'm thinking, why is this person talking a little too loud before Mass? Don't they realize that by now, I think to myself sarcastically, I would like to go up to them and say, you know, I know your whole life story by now because your voice carries in the church when you're chatting before Mass. See, so that, of course, I wouldn't do that, but that self-talk of continually thinking of sarcastic ways to think about other people, the way they dress, the way they cut their hair, the way they, you know, the most awful one that haunts me is the story of way back in the 60s. A man was so horrified that his college-age son was wearing long hair and was a draft dodger that he killed him, his own son, over this relative trivia. See, I mean, it's not relatively trivia to draft dodge, but the long hair certainly is. So I like to joke about that. I used to do that. I taught at the seminary for years. And I used to say when a seminarian happened to mention that he was going to the barber, I would say, oh, how much are you paying that you could get, the money could go to the poor in order to look less like Jesus? Okay, so now that's not sarcastic. It's more just policy. And so humor is a very good type of talk. Humor is much better, but it has to be, it can't be, if it's sarcastic humor, then it has this negativity to it. I have a prayer leader friend who's continually asking people, stop talking negative all the time. Tell me something positive. Don't, you know. But people aren't aware they do that. Now, another reason people do that I bring up in the book is that we feel superior when we're gossiping about other people's foibles or even their sins. We feel superior, see? And the great philosopher who otherwise, by the way, John Paul Sartre, the great atheist existentialist, converted on his deathbed, which many people don't know, back to the church. But anyway, he wrote a little book about anti-Semitism, which was excellent. And this is the way he put it. Okay, here's a man who's very ordinary. He's never succeeded big in anything. He feels inferior a lot of the time. But he says to himself, whenever he's making fun of Jews, he says to himself, at least I'm not a Jew. See? So we can be doing that in our conversation. See, at least I'm not like those awful pro-choice Democrats. At least I'm not like those Catholic heretics. See? So you feel superior when you're condemning them. And so that's that's one of the reasons why we talk that way. So the little book that just triggers, just gives insight into some of these basic reasons why we talk, why even if we're talking, we could be talking too much, always good, and that's bad because we don't give other people a chance, and it's like making ourselves the center of reality. But we could also be talking badly because we're not saying good things.
Right. You talk also about complaining, like this constant kvetching that some of us do just as a bad habit.
Mm-hmm.
That we
Well,
complain about.
it's also ungrateful.
Right.
It happened. My godfather, Baldwin Schwartz, his last book was going to be about gratitude, and he did that into my head, how important gratitude is. So gratitude is when we say, thank God for this, 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 instead of how horrible it is that this. See? Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, there's just anger. You talk about snapping. We can snap
Yeah.
at people continuously as well.
Oh, yeah, yeah. So, it's a new thing. See, I used to yell at people. Then I went for, I just want to say a word about one of my most important books is called Taming the Lion Within, 5 Steps from Anger to Peace. And I've been doing anger management for years, and then link up in Taming the Lion Within the techniques of anger management with Catholic spirituality. It's a very important book. So I'm really an expert on anger, but I used to yell at people like 5 times a day. But now, after 30 years of anger management, I don't yell at people so often, but I snap at them. And I'm working hard to try not to do that, to not just say, well, I'm snapping at them because they're so annoying, and anyone would be annoyed if, see. So there are wonderful ways people have shown me to get around that kind of thing. Like one driver, a theology professor who I was riding with to work, he used to, when he was driving, every time someone did something bad on the road, he would pray for them to become better drivers instead of cursing them, right? And it made a huge impression on me, because many people who would never snap at people in their families are cursing other people every time they get on the road.
Right, right.
Now, so isn't it better to be praying for them? So it's bigger than you think.
Yeah.
So maybe we should just say, if you happen to be someone who other people say, or you could even ask, do you think I talk too much? And if they say yes, you might want to look at this book and see if you can get more insights so that you would become someone who talks well, but a fine example of that would be our mutual friend, Dr. Stephen Schwartz, who's a close friend of Kiki and one of my first Catholic friends, philosophy teacher, retired philosophy teacher. I would say he talks a lot, but not too much.
Well, I think one of the things you mentioned, and I'm certainly aware of it and more aware of it since I read your book, you talked about this idea of the interconnectedness of ideas, which works out great when you're teaching or you're doing a talk show like this, having these connections. Someone says X and you think, Y and Z, and you can bring those ideas up. But I find it a real problem when someone starts to tell me a story in everyday life. And instead of listening to their story, my brain immediately goes to my own ideas that are connected to their story. And then I'm just dying to tell my story that's connected to their story.
Yeah, now it could be good, but not necessarily to interrupt and force your story on them. Yeah, it requires, as everything in our life does, that we should pray first before doing it, even a tiny little prayer, like every encounter we go into, dear Holy Spirit, help me to say what would be good, and, to realize it wouldn't kill me or the people around me if they didn't hear my juiciest story right away,
I have to take it right now. It can be very difficult. You know, that thing where you said at the very beginning, you know, where you start to realize everything begins with I, is a good way to become aware of it. So that one of the remedies you said is just mindfulness of my mouth.
Listening. Now that comes from a spiritual friend of mine who you may or may not have met. He used to come to the seminary where we both were teaching. Kiki was teaching at Holy Apostles, was teaching homiletic speaking to the seminarians, and she was around at lunch. And this man who became my great friend was around too sometimes, David Dowd. We wrote this book together called Always a New Beginning. But anyway, he's big into what he calls mindfulness, and it's a form of listening too. So mindfulness, he claims, and I have this in the book, described in the book because it's so useful, is he says, look at the room. You go into a room, check out what's going on before you jump in with your latest anecdotes. See, check the room. So one way of doing this is when you're talking to a person on the phone to say, before I talk, you talk first. A simple thing like that would be that I listen, because maybe what he or she wants to talk about is some big thing that needs my empathy, and my thing is just a funny little story.
Right. So just becoming aware of what's around you and the needs of other people.
Yeah.
That's hard.
Right.
It's a juicy story.
My granddaughter, Jenny Hurt, who has an MA in philosophy, I tried living with her for a couple of years and her family. And she used to say, Rhonda, character is not fate. See, I would be always excusing everything I did wrong as, well, that's the way I am. See, instead of what would be a better way to be. So I have all these little exercises, both in this book and also in my big book, Way of Love, where you go through, say, a whole week trying not to give, for instance, unwanted advice. Like, this is a thing, especially, Kiki, for older women. You're not as old as I am, but older women, but you're already with the empty nest. Women are used to being helpful and nurturing. So when our kids are gone, we do this with every person we meet. Every minute we're watching them and saying, oh, you'll get mud on your shoes if you go out now. Why don't you wait? See, things like that. And I call that smother love, which is what it's called, by the way, by psychologists. There are smother mothers of mothers who are there. They're also called helicopter moms, who circle about their children like in a helicopter, giving them advice, even when they're at an age where they need to make their own decisions. Now, of course, if it's a matter of life and death, you better talk. But, you know, all these trivial little things.
Right.
So
it exhausts a relationship when you have this constant advice. It also puts you in, like you mentioned earlier in the book, in this position of superiority.
Right. I know everything.
Everything. Right. But I do.
There you go.
It's just the way I am.
Yeah, laughter is a very good antidote. In anger management, one of the tools is humor is your best friend.
Absolutely.
And it's really true. When we can laugh at the same thing, then we don't get so bossy, let's say. You know. Okay,
well, that ability to laugh at ourselves, to realize that, we're not quite as great as we thought we were, is very helpful.
Oh, I'm reading a fascinating book. You might want to interview him on this. Do you know the philosopher Peter Kraft?
Oh, yes. Yes.
Yes. Well, I happened to reconnect with him recently, and he wrote just recently a book called H-A! Exclamation point, about humor. And he insists it's enormously important in life. And it's a wonderful book. So you might get in touch with him and see if you could interview him on it.
I will. He's a good friends with Steve. I would love to interview him.
Yeah.
I was at his home years ago after a conference up in Boston with Steve. Yeah, delightful. I will look into that.
So I think, as a matter of fact, one of the difficulties with retired teachers is we're so used to being center stage and people have to listen to us. So the last class I taught at Holy Apostles with people sitting around the table, not online, I said to them, well, my friends, you're the last people in the whole world who will ever listen to me. See, so we're used to having this captive audience who has to pretend at least to like our jokes, who has to let us be center stage, and then to go from that to being a background figure in many, many situations. We're retired teachers, we're background people, and we should be happy because we don't need to be proudfully center stage, right? But that takes a lot of prayer and a lot of grace. We have to ask for the grace. This is called blessed be the meek. Meek people, that is, meek is the opposite of pride. So proud people always like to be center stage.
Right. And when you're appropriately center stage, like if you're a professor or your job, your talk show host, you're doing things where, I'm teaching the grandkids a homeschooling class. You're supposed to be center stage, but that then you can't seem to get yourself off that stage, being aware of it. It takes humility to get off the stage. And obviously
Right.
That's a virtue that has to be worked at with grace.
One phrase I came up with recently, one truth was in the family, that it's possible in the family there are people who love and admire you but don't want to be your follower. See, if you're a speaker or a teacher, if people like you, they mean they want to follow your ideas. But someone could like the way you are. In fact, here's the most humiliating aspect of this. I've written some 80 books now, Kiki. 80 books, okay. But what I've noticed when I give them to the family is that they're much more excited when I give them a quilt that I knit for them than giving them one of my books. And I think that's how terrible. Because I want them to follow me, see, because I'm right. See, so they should follow me, but it doesn't mean if they won't follow me that they don't love and admire me.
Right. My grandson walked in the other day and, I had just given him my India book, Seeing God's Face. And I think it's my 7th or 8th book now. And, he's seen them all. He's had them all around. But he walked in with the India book. He's 14 and he said, Grandma, this book's good. He said, I never realized you were an author.
Oh, nice. Why don't you has someone interviewed you about that book on here?
Yes.
Oh, good. So tell them the title again, because I know about it, but tell them the title, the audience of this.
Seeing God's Face, a Catholic American Woman in India.
All right.
It's about my wonderful journey to India in 2004. And really being able to dig into the questions that Mother Teresa asked. What is poverty and what is wealth? And what do those terms mean? Because I encountered such extreme physical poverty there, material poverty, but then came home to a spiritual poverty here. So it was a very interesting journey.
Yes, yes, indeed.
So it's been fun to get those old letters and journal entries published. Thank you, Sebastian at En route.
So Talkaholics, if you want a copy of this, all you would have to do is put in Google search Chervin, Chervin. The name is right there. You could see it. Ronda Chervin, Talkaholics, and it'll tell you how to get it. And it's very cheap.
It's a very easy title to remember, which is great. So you have this week-long challenge at the end of the book of just sort of practicing slowly, talking less, monitoring your words more. Years ago, I used to do a day of silence every week. And that certainly would make me mindful of how much I love to talk. I'm actually considering, after reading your book, returning to that practice. Good. I thought the idea that self-talk is a form of being a talkaholic, of having this constant, like you said, running monologue, going with yourself and in your head all the time, about what's wrong in the world and what's wrong with everybody around you, and the negativity that comes into that, including negativity directed towards yourself that you mentioned.
Oh, right. Oh, I happen to be reading a book of meditations of St. Francois de Sales, Francis de Sales in English, Francis de Sales. And it's a book of like daily meditations taken from his writings. And I'm so impressed by the fact that he always says, you shouldn't be what we would call now beating yourself up all the time. You should just humbly go ahead praying and trying to be good. But you don't need to, this kind of thing of I'm the worst person in the whole world, I'm never going to make it. All those discouraged thoughts, they're right from the evil one. We need deliverance prayer when we have those awful thoughts.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's very easy that, like you mentioned, the negativity towards the world, negativity about other people, and then it comes over into just a general attitude rather than having an attitude of gratitude, having this attitude of negativity, judgment. There's a lack of mercy there also, both towards yourself and others.
Yeah, because obviously if God felt the same way with us sinners, he would have ended it with Noah's flood. I mean, he obviously wants us to be, and he wants to work through our flaws and help us with them. But in the meantime, he still loves us. An analogy I like to make, because I have a sweet little pussy cat, is she's not sweet. She bites and scratches. So I like to say, well, I still love her, even though she bites and scratches. I don't have any trouble forgiving her, so God could forgive me. I don't say, if you ever scratch me again, you're going out to the dump.
So you end the book with a beautiful prayer, which I eventually want to get to here, but I wanted to talk about it first, and that's that you start with this line that God created us with the gift of speech, and so that speech is a gift. And I guess like any gift, we can find ways to abuse it and misuse it.
Okay, I'll read it. Dear Father God, you created us with the gift of speech. You hope we will use this for the sake of loving communications. Help us not to annoy others by talking too much or offend you by words that are wrong. Bless our attempts to turn away from talkaholism to become lovers of good talk. Well, this was a very good talk. This was a very good talk, Kiki. Thank you for reading the book so carefully and liking it so much, and for doing this interview.
Well, thank you. It was wonderful to read. It did make me much more aware. I highly recommend the book to everyone. It's small. It's about 35 pages, chock full of just great understanding, insights, advice, and ways to move forward a little bit more quietly and more mindfully of what other people have to say. And also just curbing our own personal negativity, which enhances our own character. You're saying, like, we're not stuck with our bad character. Through virtue, we can change our character and transform our character to be more like Christ's. It's all about transformation. So we can do that. And you give wonderful ways to do that day by day, a nice week-long little workshop for ourselves. So it's a great little book. It's nice and compact and right to the point, and I love books like that. And it's also encouraged me to both be more mindful, but also to consider going back to my day of silence, which I've been thinking about for a while. But taking little bits of silence, even an hour or two during the day, is a great way to look at how much you're dying to talk. It's like when you fast from chocolate, you immediately become very aware of all the nuances of chocolate. And when you fast from speaking, even for short periods of time, it gives you different insights into how attached you are to it. So it can be helpful. Yeah. So you want to show us the cover once more? It's got those great cats, those bad cats. They're really yakking cats. So thank you. It's a great cover.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rhonda. It's been wonderful.